Welcome to this edition of the TruthLover video podcast presented by Love and Truth Party. I'm your host, Will Pye, author, speaker, transformational coach, workshop and retreat leader, and founder of Love and Truth Party. You can find out more about me at willpye.com. Love and Truth Party is a self-organizing, self-replicating community and movement of love and awakening, a wisdom school facilitating health, healing, and happiness. You can find us and join our mailing list at loveandtruthparty.org. We exist to empower the deep realization and integration of unitive consciousness of one human being and to inspire action in the world from this clarity as New Earth Ninjas, our playful avatar. We do so in the spirit of play, holding the paradox that all is well, even and including all collective crises, while simultaneously being moved to act, to lessen suffering and serve the creation of conscious culture and society. Our projects include distributing 1 million love letters from the universe, inviting people to receive the love and care in these and within the happiness hacks and other free resources found on loveandtruthparty.org. Today, I'm really thrilled to be joined by our guest, Joan Tollifson. Joan Tollifson is a writer, teacher. Her latest book, Death, The End of Self-Improvement, I love that title, celebrates the great stripping process of aging, dying, living, and spiritual awakening. Joan sees awakening as never ending and always only now. She has roots in both Buddhism and Advaita, but belongs to no particular tradition. Joan is all for genuine transformation and distinguishes in her new book between that and an oppressive obsession with self-improvement rooted in stories of deficiency and lack. Joan celebrates imperfection and brokenness as blessings. She recently survived anal cancer, which she describes as an awakening journey. Joan is the author of 4 previous books: Bare Bones Meditation, Awaken the Heartland, Painting the Sidewalk with Water, and Nothing to Grasp. She lives in Oregon, USA. Beautiful to have you with us today, Joan. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I just love the description of what you do with in your group. You know, it's beautiful description. It's
a nice framing of our conversation as well. And we came up with a title which just is profound and beautiful and current to your book that's just recently been published, Death, The End of Self-Improvement. I recall reading Awaken the Heartland many years ago and just being really touched by what was for me such a fresh and authentic voice that was quite unlike anything I'd read prior in the world of spiritual books. And I'm enjoying working through Death, The End of Self-Improvement, which will have to surely be your last book. I mean, it just seems like it seems like it's a completion in so many ways. The title, just to speak to that you've proposed, and I love the beauty of everything falling apart, aging, dying, and living in the Anthropocene. And shall we say? I reckon for our listeners, maybe not everyone knows the term Anthropocene.
Yeah, it refers to. Well, it refers to the way that through climate change and so on, we are probably heading towards we are having a mass extinction of many species and probably our own extinction. And there have been many geological periods in the past where the Earth would not have sustained human life and many mass extinctions in the past. But this refers to the first one that's human caused. So it refers to human beings as a geological force, really, bringing about, or it's not absolutely certain, of course, what's going to happen, but certainly there seems to be a good chance that we are headed in that direction. And can I just show the book?
Please.
Just so people can see it. Is that a good view? I can't tell.
Yeah, that's good. And then just up a bit. There we go. We can see the title as well. Yeah, that's beautiful. And the illustration on there, you're not only the author of the book, but you're the illustrator of the cover, I understand.
Yes, I did that little drawing of myself.
And I'm intrigued, what brought you to this book? Because I've known Joan Tollifson as a writer teacher, as you say, and if I recall, Awake in the Heartland was a sort of exposition of the everydayness of non-dual teachings, perhaps we could say. And what's the force, the inspiration behind death, the end of self-improvement?
Okay. And by the way, I've sort of dropped the teacher word and I'm using devotee of life now. I just seem to like that better. Yeah.
We had an exchange, didn't we, on...
Right. But I've never really liked the T word, the teacher word. But anyway, so what brought me to death, the end of self-improvement? Well, I'm getting old. I mean, I'm 71 and I started writing the book in 2003. And I was, at that time, I had moved from California to Chicago to be with my well, she died when she was 94 or 95, to be with my mother, who was in her 90s in her final years. And then I stayed on to be with another person in their final years. And so, and many of my friends were even 10 or 20 years older than me. So they were starting to go into retirement homes and nursing homes and things like that. And I went through menopause and, my own body started to be quite different. So it was just kind of there. It was in my face. My mother was old and dying. And then at the same time, there was this global event happening where through climate change and so on, we seem to be facing the end of our species and many other species. And so that's, and self-improvement, I've just been very struck for many years by how our society is so obsessed with self-improvement and how there's such a sense of self-hate and deficiency that so many people struggle with. And I do distinguish between that and some kind of genuine transformation like what you're talking about. So, and I feel very much in harmony with what your description of what you're doing, that I'm not putting all this out in some way where to be negative or something, but really to have gratitude and joy, even in the midst of, and a part of the book is about my journey with cancer. So even in the midst of, well, like yours, your brain tumor, The Blessing of a Brain Tumor, I think was the title of your first book, right? Yes, beautiful. I love your books, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I hear you loud and clear that, life brought you to this book, in coming from all directions. And of course, life brings us all to death. And it feels like there's a similarity somewhat in your journey with cancer and my journey with cancer, and I'm sure many people upon the planet right now. There's kind of a microcosm in some ways of the big journey, the microcosm of the experience that humanity's going through right now.
Yes.
And I'm naive. I'm an optimist. I like to think perhaps at times a visionary even, and whatever that means. And it's true that in my experience of the diagnosis, there have been many great opportunities and gifts, including facing death in a way that I believe has been very alive for you and in your book as well. And I still hope and believe it's possible that this great facing of death that collectively we're going through has the potential to create true transformation of us as a collective, as a species, some sort of shift into a new way of being and doing, of managing our resources, of being with each other and so on. Is that rooted in reality in your sense, or do you think that's just sort of new age optimism? Or
no, I mean, the way I see it, I tend towards the more dystopian view, which I don't see as tragic either. I mean, any more than I would see it as tragic if next week I found out that my cancer had spread and I had 2 months to live. I would not see that as tragic. It's just part of life, But it seems to me that, and I'm no scientist, but from what I understand of the scientific evidence, things are looking quite dire. Some people believe that there's absolutely no hope, that even if we did all the right things right now, there would be no hope. Other people see that there's more possibility. Some people are quite optimistic, actually. So there's a divergence of view, and we don't really know. We've never been in exactly this situation before, and we don't even know what this whole thing is. I mean, we talk about it being energy or consciousness or whatever. We don't even know how it all works. So of course, there's the possibility that anything could happen, including that it could bring about a wonderful transformation, as cancer or facing death often does in a human being, or coming to the end of your life. So I definitely think that's a possibility. Although I have to say, I don't right now see the political will there to do this. I mean, it feels like all these right-wing leaders are being elected around the world, and even if the most progressive candidates were to win the 2020 election in the United States, we'd still have a huge part of the population that's going in the other direction, and media that's going in the other direction. So again, that could all change. We never know how things work, so that could all change in a moment. But I personally feel like it doesn't look very encouraging, but I don't see that as tragic. And it could be, to me, it's all about now. So even if we are heading towards extinction, it's always about right now, whether we have 6 months to live or 6 million years to live. It's always now.
I want to continue that exploration and also draw something out there that I feel may be challenging to some minds that are listening or watching. This idea that the end of our species would not be tragic. So I can very much relate to that. For me, if we take a cosmic view, that just as the end of a life is not necessarily tragic, it's an inevitable, ubiquitous, universal thing that happens. And you're exploring in your book who knows what happens, if anything, at that point of death. If it's total cessation, then glorious total cessation, not a bad thing. But I wonder, can you speak to the view that it's not tragic if, let's say, the worst case scenario, temperatures rise, and in 50 years or 100 years, there's this dystopian collapse of all ecosystems, society, economies, and so on, and ultimately the Earth becomes uninhabitable for humans. Maybe Elon Musk and a few pals go off to Mars, but for the vast majority, everyone's dead, and the Earth is not an option to live on for humans for maybe another 20 million years. How is that not tragic?
Well, to me, the word tragic implies that, it shouldn't be happening somehow, that
Right.
it's really, it doesn't, when I say it's not tragic, I don't mean that it won't be painful or that there won't be suffering in some way. Just as if I were, dying of cancer right now, it might be excruciatingly painful. But that to me wouldn't make it tragic. So there's that distinction. And I guess, I do see whatever this whole thing is, whatever label we put on it, this whole, whether we call it unicity or oneness or consciousness or energy or whatever labels we put on it, and no label really does it, in my opinion, because labels are just labels. But whatever this is, I don't feel like, to me, it's like it doesn't have a beginning or an ending. It's like we are like waves in the ocean, and the ocean is still there when one wave disappears. It's not like, and the Earth is like a wave. Each person is like a wave. The whole Earth is like, the whole universe is like a wave in this vast ocean of oneness, of whatever this is. And so I feel like, my personal expectation for my own death is that it'll be like going to sleep at night or going under anesthesia. My movie of waking life will turn off, and there will be no one there to miss it. But that to me doesn't mean that whatever this whole thing is isn't still happening, but Joan won't be there as Joan. I'm not personally expecting to go down a long dark tunnel or something through the Bardos, but I might be surprised. And so, with the whole species dying, it's really just a bigger version of the same thing, and and it may be that, like, sometimes people really wake up as they're dying, you know, to the beauty of life, and they transform in some way. And that may happen to the human species. And I suspect different things will happen. There will be, on one hand, a right-wing resurgence of, you know, people being frightened and scared and picking up their guns. And on the other hand, there will be people like, hopefully you and me, and you know, truth lover people who at least maybe most of the time or some of the time respond in a different way, and for whom, you know. And so I don't see that it's ever going to be all utopia or all dystopia. To me, it's this happening is always going to be a mix. That's the nature of it.
And the response of truth lover people, or conscious people, or awakening people, or kind people, perhaps, or caring people, or progressive people, or whatever label. There's something really meaty and juicy in that, right? Because I know personally, I've often looked out at this world, and including the rise of nationalism and right wing. And I don't want to say right wing because it creates this sort of false dichotomy of left and right as distinct political systems, which I think is unhelpful. But I, of course, recognize the validity of the concept within political thought. But what I'm pointing to in my own experience is looking out at this world basically and thinking, oh my God, like, why is this world so unkind, so stupid, so brutal, so cruel? Whether that be seeing someone share their art on social media and having people trolling and saying all this most horrible stuff, or seeing, you know, just the cruelty in this world. And there was something in that when you said how we respond to the collapse, to the cruelty. I feel there's just something really profound in that. How do we respond to this climate change, to this potential collapse of human survival? It feels like there's just such an immensity in how we respond. Do we go into fear? Do we go into despair, resistance, you know, tragic? I want to get off this planet now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to wait to hang around. How's that been alive in your journey? Because it does feel like there is a capacity to respond rather than be in reactivity.
Right. Well, I think, you know, and I feel like I can find all those responses in myself, you know, everything from fear to love and joy and gratitude. You know, I've seen it all in myself. And I think that's one of the beauties of things like meditation and psychotherapy and many different kinds of practices that have arisen, is that we do begin to become more self-aware. We begin to see our own fear, our own anger, and so on, you know. And while we can't just automatically control that or something, I mean, that at least isn't my experience, but the more there's awareness of it, it does begin to shift in some way. And you know, as I see it, the people who are doing those horrible things, you know, the people who are writing cruel things on social media or whatever, they don't have the degree of insight, or because of their this is where life has led them, you know, they don't have that insight or that clarity or whatever. And so it's also about having compassion for them and seeing that this is all they can be at this point, you know. And I liked what you said about the left and the right too, because I think it's true. I mean, as I see it, that we need both. I mean, we don't, in my opinion, need the extreme right like the Nazis and stuff like that, but we do need both conservative and progressive views. I mean, obviously, you know, we need individual freedom, and we also need collective responsibility. We need strong boundaries, and we need inclusiveness and openness. We need tradition on some hand, or at least, you know, a sort of a sense of not just kind of not going too fast or something. And we also need progress and change and visions. And the ideal is that they kind of balance each other. And I think that's actually the reality in the larger sense, that they do balance each other, even though in relative terms, one or the other may seem to be getting the upper hand at some moment. But and I think we have all of that in ourselves, each of us. You know, I don't think any of us just reflect openness and joy, or that any of us just reflect fear and hatred or something. I think, you know, it's like, well, we've read about, you know, Nazi prison guards who would be horrible during the daytime, torturing people and stuff, and then they would go home at night and be wonderful fathers and husbands and listen to beautiful classical music and be nice to the dog. So they obviously had both somewhere in there, and I think we all do in some way. How do you see it?
Very much the same way, and that we're saints and sinners, fools and sages, and we have capacity for reactivity and compassionate response in each of us. And if I look back at my life, I can see a great paradox of many ways of being. And I want to pick out something that you spoke to around how to perceive people that are doing cruelty and people that are behaving violently, and to recognize, and I like this term, slow down, you know, recognize, to actually allow our thinking to evolve to what you're pointing to as I hear it, which is to see people's innocence, essentially.
Yeah.
That they couldn't do anything other than what they are doing, having had their life experiences, and you know, being in the state of fear or whatever they're in that moment. There was something else that I wanted to explore with you, which came up in that, which was, it feels like a very much sort of where the rubber hits the road of left and right and different views of the world, and ties into what might be possible and where there might be reason to hope with the future of humanity. So I have friends who tell me that the billionaire as a reality is morally wrong, that in a world of inequality there just should not be people that have that much when there are others that have so little. And I've been listening to these arguments, and I'm sympathetic to them, and feel there's some validity in that perspective, that, you know, when someone has so much more than they need and so many have so much less than what they need for basic survival and food and water, there's something fundamentally wrong with that. And I watched this documentary on Netflix, I'm sure many people have recently, about Bill Gates. And he has obviously made a huge amount of money, and he's utilizing those resources to attempt to eradicate polio initially. And he's also created a company that's producing safe nuclear power that is utilizing the nuclear waste from previous nuclear power stations as its fuel source. So potentially, if this were to be rolled out, it would be the end of fossil fuels like that, because it would be economically better, it would be without significant amounts of waste, and it would actually clean up a lot of the nuclear waste that we have. So I guess what I'm interested in this is, here we have the terrible Bill Gates, who got a lot of bad press, the terrible billionaire that gets a lot of bad press from a left-wing perspective. But it seems from their care and compassion and having the resources, they're actually creating potential solutions to some of our fundamental problems around energy. So I don't know where you want to take that. I don't know if I'm asking you a question, but that's just been a life for me in the last 24 hours.
Well, one thing that I've noticed is that life is inherently unfair. I mean, we can do our various things of social justice, and I'm all for it, you know. And some of it has been very helpful to me as a woman and you know, a lesbian, and a gender non-binary person, and a disabled person, you know, person with a disability. It's been, all of these political movements have benefited me and many other people. So we can work towards, you know, some kind of social justice, but I think there is the reality that life is fundamentally unfair. Even if we had total social justice, you still have some people are going to be born with horrible diseases and disabilities, and other people are going to be born with gorgeous, beautiful, healthy bodies. Some birds are going to be eaten in the nest, and some are going to fall out of the nest, and some are going to learn to fly. And I personally have a number of friends, maybe 2 or 3 friends, who are, inherited huge amounts of money and are very, very wealthy. And they are some of the most generous, kindest people I know, and they've used their money in very good ways to do incredibly wonderful things. There are also people who have a lot of money, like Donald Trump is a great example, who use it to, put gold everywhere in their entire house, So, there's it doesn't necessarily go that way, but I mean, of course, I would like to see a society where nobody is homeless and can't have health care and, is working 3 jobs and still doesn't have enough money for a place to live, and which is the reality in, this country anyway, a lot of, but however much progress we make on those levels, there's always just by nature going to be, some people are going to be born with more intelligence or more creative abilities, or more physical strength, or more whatever. There was a wonderful book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers, about all the different factors that go into making some of the great people, or how people from different countries are more or less likely to crash the plane, pilots from different countries and stuff. And he was sort of examining all that. And there were just really amazing things, like, I think he started out with football players, and how depending on what part of the year you were born in, which then had to do with whether you were one of the stronger or weaker ones in your class, had everything to do with whether you ended up as a professional, successful football player. And, or someone like, people who, well, Bill Gates, or any number of people, it depends so much on the moment in history when you're born.
Yeah.
The particular lucky breaks you have. And you think of all the people who had some of those things, but not all of it. They had maybe they could have invented the computer, but they were born at the wrong moment in history, and they didn't have, or they were a woman back in the, last century, or they didn't have whatever, so it's like,
in Outliers, he does speak of Bill Gates is extraordinary. I think
right.
Him and one other had access to computers at a time that no one had access to computers.
Right.
And they had access pretty much 24/7 if they wanted, which again was just one of a dozen people upon the planet at the time, or even less. And Bill Gates spoke of how lucky he has been, how fortunate he has been. And I had a friend of a friend watching this documentary and was comparing themselves with Bill Gates. And I thought, that's definitely a route to suffering, because you're not going to be as rich as him, you're not going to have done much good work as him, you're not going to be as intelligent as him.
Right.
Pretty much any comparison point is going to lead to deficiency or lack, which you pointed to as those things to watch out for in our quest for self-improvement. If we're actually coming from a place of self-hate, or we're coming from a place of deficiency, there's an inner violence in that, or an unhelpful.
Yeah, it's so easy to fall into that, comparing and we're often presented with these sort of extraordinary people, I like quadruple amputees who are climbing Mount Everest, and people who are born in poverty and end up as billionaires, and these sort of extreme. And on the one hand, it's wonderful because you find out that yes, there are more possibilities than maybe you thought there were for someone who's old or has a disability or whatever it is. So in that way, it's good, but it also sets up a thing where in the disability movement years ago, we used to call it the super crip phenomenon. Where it was like or you see it in all kinds of areas. I mean, people who are like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, that woman, the Supreme Court judge in the United States. It was an incredible woman, and apparently she like never takes a day off. The woman has survived colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, lung cancer,
Wow.
incredible family things that she's gone through. She's raised a family, and and she's in her, I don't know how, she's 90 or she's really getting up there, and she's and if I start comparing myself to her and like, well, God, when I had anal cancer, I couldn't have gone to work every day at the Supreme Court. I don't know how she did that, like, uh, and she's doing these workouts with a trainer. If you see the documentary about her, which is an amazingly wonderful documentary, but she's doing these incredible workouts that, most young men at the peak of their abilities would have trouble with. And I'm thinking, wow, if I start comparing myself to someone like that, it's just like you say, it's a recipe for feeling bad. But we're each doing, each of us are completely unique, and we're each beautiful and perfect as we are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about meeting some external ideal or being like somebody else. And this is I feel like this is just something that I'm still learning, and that's just such a deep thing in life that there's such a tendency to look to other people and then feel like I have to be more like them. I have to think more like them. My presentation has to be more like them. I have to look more, my clothes, whatever, and it's such, it's like this journey to discover that what I'm really here for. There's a Zen teacher, in Zen, they often give you, when you take lay ordination, they give you a Buddhist name, and you usually get these sort of names that are in a foreign language, and they mean something like lotus flower, full moon, or something, Well, he gives you, at lay ordination, he gives you your actual name. So like my Buddhist name would be Joan Tollifson. And I love that, because it's sort of like, that is my task in life, is to be Joan Tollifson, not to be Nisargadatta, not to be Ramana Maharshi, not to be Krishnamurti, not to be, Meryl Streep, not to be somebody else, but to be Joan Tollifson, and it just feels like that's a life lesson, that I'm still learning and still unfolding.
That's beautiful. I was given the Dharma name Ku, which is shunyata, which is emptiness. And I don't think you could get a more badass Dharma name, and also one that's impossible to live up to, truly, perhaps. And I love this idea of, I hereby ordain you as Will Pye or as Joan Tollifson. All you have to do is just be you. And
right. Which turns out to not be so easy.
Right. You're like, how do I do that? Has anyone done that before? where's the roadmap or the guide?
And yet, at the same time, we can't really fail at it either. I mean, even our attempts to look like somebody else are all, part of the journey, sort of. Like there's, like, you can't really fail at being emptiness, and you can't really succeed.
Right. There's something that comes to mind, which is, so your title of the book, Death, the End of Self-Improvement. What came with my diagnosis, like it was literally very much in my consciousness, in my journal, was this quote: death is certain, its timing uncertain, so what is important now? And I think that would be in the background of anyone's diagnosis, or and it was not allowed to be anything other than foreground in my experience. It was like, in case I was too dumb to get the message of the diagnosis, the wake-up call aspect, here it was in print that I'd written myself 5 days before being diagnosed. Now, I've been living and exploring and pondering that question a great deal. What is important now? What do I have to do or be such that when I die, I would feel complete or content or have less regrets, perhaps? And I do feel that there are particular flavors, songs that we're here to sing, or flavors of life that we're here to bring forward. You've spoken to that uniqueness that each of us has. And yeah, so maybe there is this sort of self-improvement that's still alive in myself, that I'm wondering, what is the thing, or what is the being or the song that I must bring forth whilst I'm here? So it does feel like there's something true in that. The phrase soul purpose might be one I think that you might reject, or be uncomfortable with, but that would be a common one in the lingo. You know, what's your soul purpose? What are you here to do and be that's uniquely you? Has that been something alive in your journey, in your path?
Yes, I mean, I think that question comes up for, maybe not for all human beings, but certainly for those of us who are, have the opportunity of not having to just struggle for bare survival, because
Right.
maybe if you're at that level of which so many people are, these questions don't really come up. But for those of us who are lucky enough to not be just struggling every day just to survive, then I think it's a natural question, and it's certainly come up for me many times in my life. What I've kind of, I write in the book actually about, I was on a sesshin years ago with Maureen Stewart. She was a Zen master, a Zen teacher, and she was dying of pancreatic cancer at the time of the sesshin. And she gave me that question, what do you want, as a koan at the beginning of the sesshin. And I spent days, just sort of twisting around, with these, do I want to live in New York or California? Do I want to be in Zen or non-Zen? And then finally it just hit me, I want to be awake now. That's what I really want. And it was this revelatory moment. And when we're awake now, everything sort of flows out of that, and our thoughts about whether I should be in New York or California, they don't really go anywhere. They're just sort of these little spinning things, and so what I've kind of realized is that, like right now, for example, let me back up. When I got my diagnosis of cancer, because of my age, and I don't really want to live to be so old that I am incapacitated in a nursing home or something. So I was wondering, maybe if this is an exit door, maybe I should take it. So I said to the doctor, what happens if I do nothing? And he said, well, you'll probably be dead in a matter of weeks. And I didn't have to think at all. And actually the thought that came up was, I have to finish this book. I can't die in a few weeks. And I said, okay, let's do the surgery and the treatment there. Let's do it. And now I finished the book, and it's sort of like, I'm at that one of those places in life where it's kind of like, what's next? And I don't know. But what I find different this time is that I don't find myself obsessing about it as I might have in the past. I'm not sort of spinning in thoughts about, should I do this or that or something. I just have this kind of trust that whatever is going to arise will arise, and that I'm not really in control of it, that there's a bigger thing going on here, and that I'll find out what's next. And also, in a certain way, like, it's an interesting question, like, would I be okay if I died today? Would I feel complete or something? And in some way, I think maybe we never feel complete, because there's always things on my to-do list that I haven't done yet, just on the most mundane level. And then, there's always sort of like already I can see, well, there's things I said in this book that now I would say a little differently, And so it's
I've got to rewrite the book.
I've got to write another book, I don't know if I will, but it's sort of like beyond death maybe, or something, but life after death.
Perfect. There you go. You got the title.
Yeah, but so maybe on one level we never, because life doesn't really resolve itself into some sort of neat final thing, like, oh, I've done it. There's always going to be that sense, it's part of being alive, that, like, as I joked with someone, well, there will come a time when all these things that I feel the pressure of having to get done, I don't have that anymore, and it's called death. It's like, and on the other hand, there is kind of a feeling like, if I died now, it'd be okay. I did what I did. And you know, seeing that it's not really personal feels so helpful to me. Like that it's not, but what I mean by that is that there's no little me in here who's sort of running this show. Like the wave isn't some independent thing that's deciding which way to go in the ocean. It's part of the ocean, and the ocean is moving, you know, and it's like there's a bigger happening here than little Joan Tollifson, you know. And so yeah,
it's so mysterious and curious, and I can relate to much of what you're speaking to with the wanting to get a book written. I know when I was diagnosed, and then when the diagnosis was sort of upgraded or downgraded depending upon your perspective, there was a sense of the inconvenience in relation to my to-do list and what it's done. And I can also relate to the feeling of total comfort and willingness and readiness to die now. And that's been really one of the gifts of the journey, and indeed the seizure activity that's occurred since. Because what happens in those moments of precursor symptom of altered state of consciousness and tingling in the left hand, so there's a knowing I'm probably about to have a seizure, this fear arises, and then an awareness, what am I scared of? A seizure or death. Like that's the two things that could go really wrong right now. And surrendering to that as a simple no choice to not suffer in this moment. You know, okay, seizure, death, wonderful, bring it on, I'm ready. And this is where I find it's interesting, there's an intentional breathing. There's this like simultaneous total surrender and a deeper breath and a breath into the root. And I just love this experience and what it points to, this paradox. On the one hand, of total surrender and volitional deeper receiving of the breath that's already happening. And thus far in my experience, that has meant no seizures. So I had one on a plane a couple of years back, but otherwise no seizures in 10 years. So, but apart from anything else, it's an effective way of responding to precursor potential seizure activity. And this touches on the paradox of being and living for me, that there is no little me controlling this, that I wake up, I go to sleep, there's no one there in the morning. If I look, there's no one here now. There's nothing doing no thing. And yet there is this sense of, well, if I just drink alcohol for the next, if I just say I'm going to just enjoy wine every day, that's what's important now, that's going to lead in a certain direction. And if I decide that what's important now is just to have a really limber body and I just focus on my yoga and lots of meditation, that's going to have different effects and outcomes as time unfolds. I just find this paradox of quantum mechanics, we could say, right? Where what wave and particle simultaneously and neither one nor the other. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and we can't really capture this whole reality in any concept. So, right. These concepts like free will or no free will or self or no self, these concepts, which people tend to get quite stuck in on one side or the other, but they're just concepts and they sort of point us to a certain recognition. Like right now, if I look, I can see that these words are just coming out. I can't find anybody back there who's sort of authoring them. It's like I'm hearing them too, like I don't really know what's going to come out, like there's really nobody at the controls. And yet I'm not separate. I am the ocean. I mean, I'm not just a wave, I'm the ocean, it's like, and So it's like, and there's certainly a kind of part of how this whole thing is moving is that we have apparent choice, you know, in some ways, like you're describing, you know, to breathe deeply when you feel a seizure coming on, or to choose yoga over wine as a lifestyle or something. And of course, we don't really know where either one of those would lead. I mean, you know, you might choose yoga and end up, you know,
quadriplegic,
yes, and choose wine and end up, you know, as Alan Watts, or, you know, whatever other showing our trumpa or whatever, whoever else is, you know, drunk out of their mind or something. But so yeah, so it is a paradox. It is a paradox because, yeah, it's a paradox, and we can't really get hold of it conceptually, I think, but we can see where each of the conceptual ideas kind of lead to suffering if we fixate on them. Like if we're really fixated on the idea that I am in control here, I have choice, I can choose my destiny, you know, I can choose to think positive thoughts and those will manifest reality, and I can do all this, then, you know, we're going to suffer because it's not always going to work, you know. On the other hand, if we're fixated on the other side and we sort of think, oh, I have no choice, I have no control, and we don't really see that in the fullest, biggest way, then we're going to be stuck in sort of disempowering ourselves and thinking, oh, well, I can't breathe deeply. I'm going to have a seizure, but I can't do anything about it. I'm powerless. Or, you know, I can't take up yoga because who would be doing that? You know, people get into these sort of absurd things, you know.
So
yeah.
I love that clarity. I think that speaks to this sort of ongoing dying to a position or to a point of view or to an opinion, and that's a mysterious way of being, to be dropping back into the emptiness, we could say, or to be remaining in the mystery or coming back to the not knowing. But again, words.
The beauty of your Dharma name, emptiness, you know, it's kind of like, because that does feel, what we're talking about, it really does feel like the deepest place, you know, is just not, you know, not fixating anywhere, just opening, just letting go into not knowing, not, you know, not holding on to our positions or something.
Yeah, there's a profound peace in that, in what we're speaking to. And I love the image perception that you evoked for us, that in this talking, in this speaking, there's no one doing it. There's no author, there's no controller. And it's one of the great delights in my experience of teaching. It's a word I also struggle with, or reject, because there's nothing to be taught and there's no one teaching. But in these environments where you will have had a similar experience, we sit down in a chair, perhaps in front of a room, or maybe in a circle, if we've tried to avoid too much suggestion of hierarchy. And in my experience, there's never an agenda or a thing that I want to say, and yet something will be spoken, and very often it's helpful, not always, of course. And that's one of the great joys and delights in my experience, as it is in this conversation with yourself. I do these truth lovers because it's actually just very enjoyable to be having these dialogues, to be in this conversation, exploring reality in real time, as it were.
It is enjoyable, and I love doing it with you. It's great, and it's true. You know, it's like, it's this paradox, because we're like one whole happening. Like there's no Will and there's no Joan. There's just this happening, And at the same time, there's Will and there's Joan, you know, it's like, you can't really deny either aspect of it or something. Yeah. Years ago when I was giving my first talk, and it was going to be before a large group at Spirit Rock in California, and my teacher, Tony Packer, who never used that word, my friend Tony Packer, she said, don't think about it at all beforehand. And I said, what? And she said, just don't think about it at all. If you start thinking about it, just stop. Don't give it any thought. Just show up, be present, and see what comes out. And that's what I've done ever since, more or less. I mean, every now and then I'm in a situation where I do sort of need to give some thought to it. But actually, I find it goes better when I don't give some thought to what's going to be unsaid, you know?
Yeah,
and,
I found that out in my first 10 or so talks. Like generally I would just show up, but on one occasion I had this really clever idea for what I was going to title the talk, and it was so clever how it played with this and it played with this, and it was the worst. It was just mind nonsense, and it was the worst experience relative to the others, because there was this maybe lack of flow and so on. So I learned that through my own experience as well, and that's all that I do now, is ensure that I show up. I mean, it sounds so simple as to be absurd. Well, of course you show up, but it is nothing more than that, to take the seat in not knowing, to see what's before us, to drop into the felt experience of being in this space with this group, with these people in this context, in this country, in this time. Obviously not as a mentation, but as a here we are. And then words happen. It's really an extraordinary gift, I feel, to have been able to have that experience with people, and to do it once. You know, like, what's important now, what, like, to sit back on the deathbed and look back like, wow, that was cool to do it once. Would my life be any more meaningful or beautiful if I'd done it 100 times or 1,000 times? Would it mean more if I'd given that experience to thousands of people, or hundreds of thousands rather than thousands? I don't know, but it feels perfect and precious just as it is.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's really become so clear to me lately, post-cancer and, you know, getting old, is just that life is beautiful just the way it is. Like, it doesn't, you know, it's not about how big the crowds are, or how many huge events I've done, or how many books I've written, or how successful they were, or any of that stuff. And it can be something so simple as just smiling at somebody on the street, or saying hello to, having a little conversation with the checkout clerk, you know, about the weather. And like that beautiful Louis Armstrong song that I quote in the book, you know, it's a beautiful world, you know, we're saying, we say these things like talking about the weather, but what we're really saying is, I love you. You know, that's what the checkout clerk and I are really, we're exchanging love. And we're having this little, you know, apparently sort of superficial conversation that the checkout clerk probably has to have with everyone who comes through, you know, like, oh, it's a great day today, isn't it? Or, oh, the snow, whatever, you know. And yet it's really just saying, I love you, I love you. You know, it's just an exchange of love. And that's, to me, that's as important as speaking to an auditorium full of thousands of people on, you know, national or international television or something. You know, it's like, and we know that from physics, even, that the smallest little thing influences the whole. But it's just really more deeply felt, you know, that's true. That so yeah, it's a kind of letting go of grandiosity or something, I guess, you know.
Yeah, I love that you've taken us to that, because one of the teachings or pointings of Love and Truth Party is this idea that we're playing powerfully in the pure democracy of consciousness. So that little moment of connection with the checkout assistant is nothing in a sense. In a material sense, it hasn't changed the world, but in an immaterial sense, in an energetic exchange, there's something that happens. There's a ripple out from every action, from every moment. And if there's a moment of tenderness or a moment of maybe listening a little deeper to that checkout assistant than maybe most of the people have during that day, or speaking from spontaneity and honesty rather than, you know, just the contorted conformity of, yeah, great, you know, the script. That there is beauty in that, and I love this idea of, you know, what we're really saying in that small talk of being an expression of love, of being an experience of connection. Yeah.
And it might be something that we don't even, that's not even involving other people. You know, it might even just be how we're cleaning the kitchen counter, or
yes.
As I write about in my book, how I'm changing my ostomy bag, or
right.
You know, how we're whatever, you know, it might be something that no one else, how we're drinking a cup of tea alone. It might be something that, how we're caring for the objects in our home or something, you know, it might be something.
And it feels pertinent in our conversation topic, the Anthropocene, how we are marveling at nature's beauty, or how we're standing upon the earth. I went for a run this morning and there was this mist over the river, a particularly beautiful mist. So I had to stop because, you know, where am I running to, right? What's the point of running at? So I had to stop and just enjoy this. You know, thankfully, I don't time myself or anything anymore, and just stop and enjoy this beauty, and appreciate the extraordinary gift of that. I have this phrase, impossible beauty, and it points to this experience when it's like it's almost impossible to grasp the profound beauty of this moment, of this this preciousness of this being. And it's certainly, as you've pointed us to, impossible to express in words, though we do our best to try.
Yeah. And even somehow, you know, the devastation, like, because we see the beauty in the earth, and then we see what's happening, clear-cutting forests and the Amazon burning and species dying, just in the same way that on an individual level, we see a loved one who was strong and healthy and brilliant slowly losing one capacity after another, and as they move towards death with an illness or old age, that there's a beauty in that also, that it's possible to see that and to meet that with love and joy, and not in some false, phony way, but just and not to say that we deny the sorrow or the pain that's in there either, or the grief or any of those things if they're there, but just that there's a beauty even in, I mean, that's one thing I really realized, like caring for being with my mother in the end, you know, I mean, all these things that I would have thought, or having an ostomy and having anal cancer. I mean, you know, it was like all these things that I would have, having, you know, my intestine protruding out my belly, you know, things that you would normally think of as being sort of ugly and repulsive, and ugh, I don't want to even look at that. And which was my first reaction when I woke up in the hospital, like, oh no, like Alien or something. But you know, then now I'm very fond of it. I talk to it, I sing to it, I watch it, I love it. I've grown very fond of it, you know. And the same with my mother, you know, looking at this deteriorating flesh and stuff, and just that there's beauty there's beauty even in the oil spills and the devastation and dead things. I mean, it's all part of this whole happening somehow. It's all included somehow.
Yeah, aho. It just feels like such a sweet point of conclusion. I'm just I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.
Today,
Oh, this
Joan.
has been great. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. I just love you. So
I love you too, and I'm so looking forward to sharing this with our viewers, and looking forward to people enjoying your book, Death, the End of Self-Improvement. I probably don't need to say the title again. It's pretty memorable. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us, Joan. I look forward to the next time we can share space.
thank you, Will.
And thank you to our listeners and viewers also. Thank you for listening and watching. You can visit loveandtruthparty.org to join our community, find out more about Joan as well, to download or order love letters, register for our newsletter, and of course you can connect on social media, and indeed consider a financial gift at loveandtruthparty.org. Thank you to all our supporters and contributors. Together we are creating kind, conscious, courageous human community.